They didn't. Well, welcome. We're back with our favorite congressman. If there is somebody who doesn't recognize you, why don't we start with an intro?
Hey, my friend, Joe Kennedy, congressman from the 4th Congressional District and congressman from Milford. Thrilled to be here.
Always happy to see you in Milford. You seem to be here a lot.
Try to be. Thrilled to be back. Thanks for the invitation.
And as always, Miss Emily keeps us to a tight schedule.
Yes, she does. Yes, she does.
It seems like you're spending a lot of time dealing with opiates.
We are, Alan, and look, this has been a priority for me ever since I was prosecutor in the DA's office and a couple of different offices in Massachusetts. When I saw just how big an impact this was having on families and communities across Massachusetts, and so it's been a priority for me through my work there in the law enforcement community, and certainly since I just got down to Washington at the beginning of my first term. Proud to be able to sponsor file legislation just a couple of months ago. It's got great bipartisan support to try to tackle one piece of this, which is a major prescription monitoring program and a national prescription monitoring program to try to make sure that doctors have an idea when somebody comes to fulfill a prescription or ask for a prescription, they can see whether they've gone to other states to get that prescription as well. So critical for parts of my district, some places like Fall River, where you've got a border pretty close where somebody could, ask for come to Rhode Island, get one prescription, cross state lines, try to get another prescription. And that type of innovation and that type of coordination is going to be absolutely critical for us to get a handle on this. That in of itself isn't going to solve this problem, but I think, at least in my mind, this is a demand-driven epidemic. And in my conversations with law enforcement as a prosecutor and even now, talking with federal authorities, local authorities, they acknowledge that we're not going to arrest our way out of this problem. It is a public health crisis. We have to find ways to actually get folks the treatment and prevention that they need in order to make sure that we get our handle on it. So that means, from my perspective, making sure we put the reforms in, and largely the way that the federal government can put incentives in for people to get the treatment that they need before they end up breaking into homes and committing crimes.
I mean, it's always good, especially during an election year, good political press to say, lock them up and we're going to arrest our way out of this. But is it practical?
Certainly, absolutely not, and certainly not in this situation. Al, I had, as a young DA, I can't tell you how many times I saw kids that were 22, 24, 18 years old that were breaking into 15 cars in a night, 5 or 6 homes in the course of a weekend, didn't have a prior record, and were doing it because they were addicted to OxyContin. And they were trying to find money to go in, break into homes, steal stuff, sell it at the local pawn shop to feed a $400 or $500 a day habit. And an OxyContin pill, an 80 milligram pill, it's essentially $1 a milligram on the street. So one pill goes for $80. So if you've got a 4 or 5 pill a day habit, you're looking at $350, $400 a day just to keep that habit going. Or you turn to heroin, which you can get in parts of New England for $5 a bag. And so we see this transition from Percocet or OxyContin, prescription drug abuse, to heroin, and after folks are addicted to heroin, it's a really grave situation. So yes, you can, I applaud my first boss, Michael O'Keefe down on the Cape, who said, your job as a DA is to try to make sure that person, case file in front of you, never commits another crime. For some of those folks, those are bad people, you lock them up for as long as you can. For others, like these kids, you've got...
You mentioned the 18, 20, these are our neighbors' kids.
Neighbors' kids that are good kids. They're suffering from a drug abuse and an addiction. And so if you can lock them up for 3 months without addressing the addiction problem, they're going to come back out again and have to start committing more crimes. You have to address the addiction issue. And so that's where, look, in my mind, a lot of this comes back to the fact that the federal government hasn't put the incentives and the resources in to actually flush out a treatment system across our country, substance abuse and mental health treatment. And so that's really one of the issues that I've been pushing forward. We've had a number of hearings in Washington, D.C., in the past month that have been fantastic, and I applaud Congressman Murphy, a Republican from Pennsylvania, who's been leading the subcommittee and brought in the head of a number of agencies just last week from across the federal government. We had about 8 or 9 witnesses there, I think 8 witnesses. And about 2 weeks beforehand, had another great hearing on it. And the stories that you hear from folks that are on the front lines of this are heartbreaking. And again, complex issue and complicated issue. He's working on a bill to try to get at some pieces of it. Again, the piece that I think is most critical is trying to make sure that the federal government actually puts in the incentives so that there are, in fact, we get more doctors in to treat people. You get the beds that are necessary in order to get people the treatment that they need. We increase the ability for community services and wraparound services to really flush out that continuum of care. Because Al, as you know, even if you have the family support around you, even if you got the courage to be able to go in and get treatment, you're coming out, you're battling addiction for the rest of your life. And it's reasonable to assume that there's gonna be setbacks along the way. You gotta make sure that people are getting the help that they need throughout the course of the next, if a kid's 22 years old, 60 years. And we as a community, as a society, I think are now coming to the recognition that it's gonna be far better for us to, and not just from a moral perspective, but from an economic one, to invest in treatment and prevention up front than it is to try to say, okay, well, we're gonna lock you up and throw away the key and get you in the cycle of addiction and relapse and criminal justice system and
It seems like we've come to accept alcoholism as a disease and understanding that alcoholics are forever.
Yeah.
And they, you have to have the courage to back them so that they fight that for the rest of their life. I think it's still that stigma of you're a druggie.
And Al, I think, that, if there is a very hard silver lining to come to in this, the number of folks that I have met over the course of my discussions of these issues in the past several years who said, I didn't know anything about this before, and then it was my son, my daughter, my neighbor's kid, my cousin, my niece, my nephew, father's friend. People understand that, as you said to start off the segment, these are our neighbors, these are our friends, these are our kids, these are our community members. And it no longer has that, people are recognizing this isn't just something that happens to other people I don't know.
Well, in the abstract, Joe,
Yeah.
it's so easy. It's like the immigration issue.
Yeah.
Turn them away.
Yeah.
And I've sat there and said, really?
Yeah.
You have a 2-year-old, 4-year-old little girl looking at you saying, Mr. Help me? I don't know of many people that would turn their back. It's the same thing. Yeah. When you hear about it happening, well, these druggies from there. Yeah. Where's there? Well, not my neighborhood. But the minute it's your friend or some little kid that grew up on the street, and you hear about the sports injuries and they get hooked, now all of a sudden, how do you turn your back on the kid that you grew up with?
Al, I had surgery. Turns out I wasn't as good an athlete as I thought. I've had knee surgery, I've had shoulder surgery. I had shoulder surgery a couple of years ago. On my surgical bed, going in pre-op, one of the residents came by and started writing me a prescription for painkillers afterwards. And I got in an argument with that doctor on my bed saying, if you write me that script, I won't take it. Mm-hmm. And had to debate the doctor to lower the dosage and I got prescribed a much larger quantity of pills than I ever would need. And I took them for 2 or 3 days, and then look, I'm so terrified of these pills at this point because I've seen and heard the stories, just as you said, from folks that, like me, got banged up playing sports, had surgery, and then all of a sudden get hooked on this stuff. And after you're hooked, it is so hard to break it.
Well, I mean, think about the discussion we had before we rolled the show. We're talking about alkaloid addiction, and I am a happy addict of caffeine. And you're
a little
sitting there
more so than mine.
saying, okay, I don't know that I'd want to give up coffee or that I could give up coffee. Mm-hmm. And when you think of what I'm going through on alkaloids compared to, orders of magnitude higher demand from your body on opiates, I just can't fathom what it must be like for these people.
Look, it's, I think particularly with heroin, the issue isn't, which I think a lot of people don't understand, it's not the high that you get, it's the withdrawals. And it's the withdrawals for symptoms that If you talk to folks that have been going through and are suffering from this addiction, trying to get clean is an almost unbearable process. And it means that they're going to need an awful lot of love and support as they go through it. And Al, look, if you're an 18-year-old kid or a 20-year-old kid that ends up, as I said, breaking into a bunch of cars or homes, you're doing that because you don't have any money left. One of the most heartbreaking moments I had in the DA's office, I've told the story a couple of times. Friday afternoon, we had finished all the arrests for the day. Another one came in, and I come running back into the courtroom, and a mom and dad, man and woman, step in front of me and said, "Hey, I want to talk to you. My son just got arrested." And I said, "Well, I'm the prosecutor. You want to talk to the defense attorney?" And they said, "No, we want to talk to you because I want you to hold my son without bail." I said, "Okay." And their son had just returned from fighting overseas and had gotten addicted to OxyContin. He had stolen and sold almost every piece of jewelry that the family had. And their parents, they weren't sure what their son would do if he were released that day. They called the cops, got him arrested, and the dad had found a bed for him on Monday, but he needed to make sure he would get into a treatment center. So the only thing that he could think of was having him spend the weekend in jail. This case gets called, and the judge kind of sees me stammering a bit, and I was watching it. One of my colleagues actually did the arraignment, and this young man stood up in the dock lockup, and he said that he apologized to his family. He apologized to the judge. He said that he knew he needed help. He wanted to get help, and if he were released, he wasn't sure what he would do later that day. Judge obviously held the young man without bail, and as far as I know, he went off to treatment on Monday. That's what's happening to not all but many of our men and women in uniform. And when it gets to the point that a family, the only recourse that they have for their son who has served honorably in our armed forces, the only thing they can think of is sending him to jail for a weekend because they are at their wits' end and don't understand their own limitations and that of the power of this addiction and can't come up with another solution other than putting him in jail for a weekend. That's on us. That is on our society to try to say, is that really how we're going to treat?
Again, it's something that, somebody asked, what would you do if your family was starving? Yeah. And I would beg the question, say, you don't know. I don't know what I would do. I don't know what I would become if I had to do something that I normally wouldn't consider to keep my family alive. Well, in my mind, these addicts are at that point. They're out of any norm. I can't ever understand what they're going through. I hope I never do. Yeah. So, you've got to count on people like you to do the due diligence, try the programs, and God help that we never know anybody, but if we do, just be supportive.
Well, look, I appreciate that, and I wholeheartedly agree with you. And there's, I think, a lot that the federal government needs to be doing. I will applaud the congressional delegation here in Massachusetts. Catherine Clark has been really focused on the impact that this has on young children. Bill Keating, a former district attorney, has been focusing on tamper-proof drugs. Steve Lynch, Congressman Neal, they've been working on this for a long time. Governor Baker's made this a priority for his administration. Attorney General Maura Healey's been taking this on as well. So a lot of us are active on it, and there's a lot that needs to be done. A lot of this is going to have to come from a basic community level and from community members looking out for each other and trying to say, hey, when we do recognize it, when we recognize addiction in a neighbor, when you recognize that somebody is in need of help, that they get the support that they need. Part of it is also trying to make sure we prevent that from ever happening. So one of the pieces that I think every person can actually do, and it's been an initiative we've been pushing for the past couple of years, is if you've got extra medication from that surgery that you took a couple pills, you didn't use all of it, when was the last time you actually looked to see if there were still pills left in that bottle?
Take them. Police chief said, bring it down to the station. We've got a drop off, no questions asked, get rid of it.
Drop off those drugs at a local police station. They have receptacles for them. We've pushed these prescription drug drop-off days that the DEA used to do. Now many police departments will accept them anytime. But the quantity of drugs that is available or that ends up getting turned in is astronomical. And so would certainly strongly suggest to folks if you do have additional empty prescriptions or extra prescriptions out there that they turn
get rid of them.
Absolutely.
Now we turn to trade.
Yes.
Something that does affect all of us because we all want to be employed.
Yep.
And obviously, trade affects Massachusetts, I wouldn't say more than any state, but I would say almost as much as any state.
So look, there's a big initiative in that the administration's been trying to negotiate or been negotiating now for several years. It kind of comes in three phases. One is the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which is a trade agreement with the United States and 11 other nations. It captures almost 40% of global GDP. It's a massive trade agreement. Simultaneously, they're also negotiating one with Europe called TTIP, which is an investment partnership with Europe. And the way that the administration has chosen to do all of this in order to actually streamline the process to get these deals negotiated is through what's called Trade Promotion Authority, or sometimes known as fast track. So essentially what that means is Congress passes legislation that gives the authority, that basically limits the president to say, as long as your agreement abide by these characteristics.
Here's your boundaries.
Here's your boundaries. Go negotiate. And the White House has, House Republicans struck a deal with Senate Republicans and some Democrats. They unfortunately were not able to come to a deal with House Democrats. So on that framework deal, that is what we're in the midst of trying to get through at the moment, and then we'll see if we can get onto those other two pieces, the Asia trade agreement and then the European trade agreement afterwards. Look, Massachusetts has some fantastic companies that are trying to increase their exports overseas and really are not just national leaders, but international leaders and global leaders in life sciences, biotechnology, pharmaceuticals, high-tech, healthcare, health IT, advanced manufacturing. And some of this could be a benefit to these companies. The question that I continue to ask the administration is, I understand that piece to it, but what is this agreement going to do for that foundation of our economy? The Fall Rivers, the Tauntons, the Milfords, the Attleboroughs of Massachusetts, and trying to make sure that, look, I don't think there's any doubt that people recognize that our economy has got to shift and is in the midst of a transition now. Trade can provide some rules of the road there, but that can't come at the expense of working or leaving behind working class and middle class families that also need to make sure that they can participate in an economy going forward and have an absolutely critical piece to making sure our companies are more competitive, because it's their productivity and their skills that are going to continue to drive the productivity of those companies. So in my mind, this has to also be matched with investments in education, skills, infrastructure, tax reform, and we're pushing the administration to try to make sure this is
And
part
I think
of
your
the discussion.
position is absolutely spot on. Giving up is always easy.
Yeah.
But before we give up, because, talking about the future is great. But if you're the guy who needs to make his mortgage or the woman who needs to pay her mortgage, it's kind of like unemployment is a nuisance till it's you.
Yeah.
You can read about it and it seems, that's not good. When it's you and you can't pay your bills, it's
Right.
more than a nuisance.
And look, we can't, when I go into these our communities that I represent and hear from businesses, big and small, that are trying to expand markets, are fighting, scratching and clawing to try to make sure that they can compete in a new globalized economy. And we have here in Massachusetts access to the best talent anywhere in the world, and that's really what drives our economy here, both at a regional and international level. These businesses are just saying, look, give us a shot. But that shot just cannot just be rules of the road to help multinational corporations increase those exports at the expense of making sure that talent and that our workforce has the ability to keep a roof over their head, food on their plate, and a kid in a good school. And that aspect of it, I think, so far is what's been missing from, and that discussion's been missing from the dialogue around this agreement. So we'll keep pushing the administration to try to make sure that you got to make, workers are an essential part of what makes our economy great. And they're our competitive advantage going forward.
One of the things we worry about is you have this great, TPP and all these agreements, and you sit there and say, great, the American companies are going to increase their revenue by shipping more products out of their Irish facilities. okay, what am I missing in this equation for me in Milford or Fall River?
So look, the agreements are massive, and it's been, the administration has provided a number of briefings for Congress. Those briefings, if they are half an hour or an hour, trying to get through literally thousands of pages and understand the details of what's in there. And members of Congress, for many of them, if they allow me to take notes, I have to leave those notes in a sealed room because I can't take them from me. You can't. Sometimes I can have a staff member that can get briefed on it. Sometimes I can't. So it becomes rather challenging to try to really understand how all of the parts of this massive agreement actually fit with each other. And there's some pieces of this, some of the trade partners there, Canada, Mexico, the United States already has a very strong integrated economy from other trade agreements. Some other countries are much less, that framework is much less developed. You've got countries like Vietnam that are potentially very, very strong allies going forward, and having them increase their standards and be able to play on a level playing field with the United States will be very beneficial in the long run. In the short run, trying to understand what this is going to do to our textile manufacturing business and the ones that are left in Fall River and Taunton, a tough sell. And so we continue to push the administration to try to get information and a rationale for how is this really going to impact and hopefully benefit those businesses.
And I can see how we want more transparency out of Congress. But on the other hand, if you want to buy my home and I get privileged information that you can go between $50 and $100, there's your guidelines. Now you come in and talk to me. I'm no longer thinking 50. Even if I wanted 75 for the house,
Right.
I'm saying, young Joe, you get a $100 budget. Okay, I'm thinking 99 we start at.
There you go.
Part of me has to believe that we've got to trust. And, trust becomes such an important factor. You've shown, people seem to like you. They seem to think you're pretty straightforward and upfront, which to me is a very nice characteristic.
Appreciate that.
And I've got to trust that, okay, when you go in that room, okay, I've given you the gun and the bullets. I can't send in Barney Fife. Here's the gun, I'll hold the bullets. And too much of the negotiation feels like Barney Fifeism.
Look, we've got, trying to negotiate these agreements is extraordinarily difficult. And I do give, the administration, the folks that are working on those negotiations are some of the hardest working members of government. So I give them credit and I respect them immensely for their work and their service. The bottom line, though, is that I'm elected to represent 730,000 people in the 4th District of Massachusetts. And so I need to be convinced that this deal in aggregate is going to be better for residents of this district. And it's not going to stop me from asking the tough questions of the administration and trying to get answers from them. And again, understanding that there are parts of Massachusetts that potentially could benefit from this agreement. That cannot be at the expense of or by end up leaving behind the foundation of what makes Massachusetts economy run and makes our country, brought us to literally decades of extraordinary prosperity by building out and supporting and strengthening and the greatest middle class that the world has ever seen. And that is the piece to this that I am still trying to get clear answers to, is to say, how does this actually benefit those middle class workers and not make it even easier for companies to then now have to compete in a even more globally integrated environment, which is going to force them to shift jobs to the companies and countries that have, to the countries that have the lowest environmental protections, the lowest workforce protections, the lowest enforcement standards, in order to try to compete with other companies out there that are doing the same thing. And we're
So now, if we get our trade, we actually are employed, which is good. But we're running into the season where electric bills are going to start skyrocketing, and you've been involved in some energy action.
Yes, so energy rates, Al, look, there's not literally a day and certainly not a week that goes by where I don't hear from constituents, and not just homeowners, but particularly business owners, about the skyrocketing of their electric bills. And I've heard and read about it, and I've talked to many other members of Congress from across Massachusetts and New England, and they all have stories of that company that said, I would have hired 4, 5, 6, 10 more people, but my electric rates went up so much, I'm paying this off in a bill. So I got interested in this because there's a power plant in my district in Somerset, Massachusetts, Brayton Point, that was an old coal and gas-fired power plant that was scheduled to be shut down, and it's been sold a couple of times, and then it was taken off, indicated that one of the owners who was going to take it offline. That ended up causing, and some other factors caused some aspect of these energy prices to spike, and that really got me interested in what the intricacies of our energy markets, which are extraordinarily complex, far more complex than I ever could possibly have imagined they were designed. And we've really been trying to push the regional regulators, so it's the grid operator, try to make sure that the lights stay on, ISO New England, and the federal regulators, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, FERC, to try to get some answers from them as to how these markets are set up, if in their mind they are working properly, and if they're working according to the rules that are set, if those rules are actually adequate to get the markets and the type of response that we need, which in my mind is a modern grid that delivers that electricity at an affordable price, that is reliable, we know the lights are going to go on, and moves towards a clean energy future. But it's got to balance all of those aspects. We got to make sure that it's affordable, otherwise you're going to push businesses out. You got to make sure it's reliable, otherwise people don't know if the lights can go on. You got to make sure that, I think we've got a forward-thinking administration here and across New England that understands the impacts of climate change. We want to try to transition to renewables. We understand that we've got to make sure that that's price competitive as we do so. So trying to balance those aspects of it. And I've got some very strong concerns that as it's set up now, these markets aren't functioning to give us that type of response. And look, we've seen these payments, or these costs skyrocket. And so clearly it's not functioning quite the way that I believe they should.
Well, we look and we say we saw this huge seasonal extra. Okay, season's over. So we're waiting to say, okay, if it went up 39% because of seasonal issues, we weathered the season. Next time you come on, maybe we can ask, did it come back down?
So in my conversation with some of the energy companies, they've said over the course of the winter, those rates did go up, and that was largely because of the indications from the polar vortex a year ago. They've indicated that the prices should come down this summer. The challenge is that price is largely from the purchase of natural gas.
Right.
There's other aspects to your electric bill. And what we've been tied into or really focusing on are what's called capacity payments, which are these interesting mechanisms by which the regulators, trying to build a power plant takes a long time, and they need to make sure that the lights will in fact turn on. So they provide payments to generators, to electric plants, to try to say, this is a base payment that we're going to give you to make sure that you keep the lights on. And we do that 3 years in advance so that if there's a problem, we can actually have time to fix it. Those payments have now gone up from about $1 billion a couple years ago to, they're done through auctions, and they went from $1 billion in capacity payments to the most recent one, $4 billion. And so that's a quadrupling of those costs that haven't even been reflected yet in your electric bill. Those costs you haven't seen. The percentage of that that's actually reflected in your bill, the capacity payments, is a much smaller cost as to the cost of natural gas, which is why you saw such a big hit this past year. But again, these are costs that you haven't even seen yet. So we're going to see these prices continue to increase. And that's really where I've been focused with the ISO New England and the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission to ask these guys, what's going on, and why, if you knew this was going to happen, which others have said we knew there was a problem, well, if you knew it, why didn't we do something about it?
Yeah, why are we waiting?
And how could you say, well, this is a clear indication to the market when the market didn't do anything about it? And if the market didn't do anything about it, were the rules actually set sufficiently to make sure that customers, you and I, don't have another place where you can go to get electricity, right? Your Dunkin' Donuts jacks up the cost on you. There's another Dunks down the street you can go to. there's no other place you can go to turn your lights on. And this is something that we're going to stay very focused on and still try to get some answers
Well,
out
when
of
we
these
come back,
feds.
we'll be asking.
Thank you.
The last, I guess I give you a chance, coming from, a purple guy, because neither blue nor red will accept
But you
me.
wore the blue tie, my friend.
I
so
wore
there
the
you go.
blue tie. I had to do that for you, but it was seeing a little bit more, and it's a healthy thing of hearing that word bipartisan. I'll give you a chance. In your opinion, is it just a short term, or are we finally getting over the we're blue, we don't talk to red, we're red, we don't talk to blue?
Look, we've actually seen over the course of the past couple of weeks and months some pretty massive agreements come together in legislation
Yes.
passed. So some technical stuff from the way that the government actually pays for Medicare, called the stock fix or sustainable growth rate, repealing that, replacing it with a new model, issues on other appropriations stuff and the kind of inner workings of DC, to potential for an Iranian nuclear agreement, to other issues that are and have been very contentious, but there has been a way to find a common ground and agreement. I genuinely hope we're able to turn the corner on this and start to find a pathway toward that common ground. I think it's in the interest of Republican leadership to show that they can, in fact, govern. It's certainly in the interest of Democrats and a Democratic president to try to
But
find.
can they keep the 420 Republican presidential candidates? Can they keep them on course, or?
So that's going to be the question. And I think you're seeing, even as we speak, Leader McConnell struggle to do that with a couple of presidential candidates in the Senate that are going to be, positioning themselves for a presidential campaign in the midst of conservative Republican primaries, and trying to make sure that they don't destroy the potential to get real reforms done that the rest of the country wants and needs. And look, it's hard for me to sit there and celebrate big reforms, which, look, I think are wonderful, but that is also what we're supposed to do.
Right.
So
You're doing your job.
you don't get a cookie for doing your job, right? But we'll keep working at it.
And we're coming to the end, although I'd love to keep you here.
Come
I
back
know
next
that
time.
you have business to deal with in Washington. So, as always, thank you for stopping by. And I hope that you get a continuing glimpse at the people who represent us. We're very fortunate when the whole issues of trust and likability keep coming up in the presidential election. Think about our daily lives, because this election will be over in a heartbeat. But get to know the people who represent you and make sure that you trust them, that they're up front. I think we're very fortunate throughout Milford, all the people who do represent us. So as I always say, thank you to our 6 loyal viewers, and may God bless, and may tomorrow be a better day than today. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, my friend. Always a pleasure.
Not too long since I've been home.